This is the last panel discussion of these last 2 days, and we're talking about a really, really important topic for me, at least, is how can we encourage athletes, but also coaches, to think about sport as a vehicle for growth in your life, and how can you align that sport career with the bigger picture of life. So I'm gonna let Val take it away, and I'm gonna disappear and leave you all with her.
Thank you, Miriam. I'm thrilled to be hosting this session today. I'm actually one of the original board members with Athlete Soul, and it's always fun getting to do the Feed the Soul Summit. It's been great so far. I also coach myself. I'm still in aquatics, so I'm excited to hear personally what you guys have to say, as well as for our audience. If we could start with introductions, just a couple minutes so we can learn about you. Dominic, will you go first?
Sure, absolutely. Hello, everybody. My name is Dominic Militello, founder and operator of careercoachingforathletes.com. I was a three-sport athlete in high school, Division I college soccer player, had a 4-year pro soccer career. I really focused my expertise in working with athletes, executives, and artists in career transition. And I really believe my role as a career coach is to empower my clients to create a new self-image, to think and act a little bit differently, which really allows them to engage with the extremely competitive marketplace at a very high level to get the results they seek. And generally those results are generating interviews and offers that can lead to fulfilling their purpose after sport. So.
Wonderful. Dr. Wilsa, welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. I am Dr. Wilsa Charles Malveaux. I'm originally from Maryland, but spent most of my life on the West Coast in California. I was a fourth sport athlete in high school. I was recruited for soccer and track and field, and I went to Stanford on a track and field scholarship. I trained for Olympics for many years, retired eventually due to several factors, but mostly injury. And I still work with athletes now. I actually am a consultant for the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. I'm a registrant for the Mental Health Registry for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And I'm also one of the psychiatrists for the NBPA's Mental Health and Wellness Program. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And Robert.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Robert Parisian. I am a orthopedic sports medicine surgeon at Mount Sinai in New York City. Over the years, I've been a team physician for Boston University Athletics as well as Penn Athletics, currently a team physician for US Ski and Snowboard, and Mount Sinai is the official medical provider for US Open. Providers, prior to this part of my life as an athlete, I played multiple sports growing up: football, baseball, basketball, track, skied competitively, and then ended up playing football at Brown. It's my collegiate career. Did not pursue that at the pro level, but pursued medical career after that, and here I am. So just believe in the mission here at Athlete Soul, and happy to join.
Thank you. We're pleased to have you all with us today. I have a couple of questions just to guide our conversation about long-term vision for athletes. And the first one is, how can we encourage athletes to think more long-term? Usually athletes are very focused on a specific goal for their sport, and how can we help them apply more purpose, vision, and planning for the future. So Dominic, will you go first?
Absolutely. One of the major factors for me in my career transition, coming out of what Oprah Winfrey called the dark night of the soul, right? Where we lost this identity, we lose our self in this new area we find ourselves in transitioning. One of the questions I remember distinctly asking myself in that time period was, how do I want to leave my legacy? What's my legacy for my kids, for my family, for my siblings, for my children, grandchildren? And if I stay on the path I'm on right now, being in that dark night of the soul, it wasn't going to be pretty. So I just said, I have to kind of get it together here. Started reaching out, doing the things like we talked about in some of the earlier panels of reaching out, finding mentors, asking questions, being curious, changing some of the beliefs that I had about myself and about this job searching and all that. And so what I started with was, what is that legacy going to be for me when I'm gone and I've lived my 70, 80 years, 90 years, whatever it is? How do I want my children, grandchildren to remember me? And that's really the thing that kicked it off for me as far as getting back on track and start doing the things that would ultimately get me to that goal. So that's what I would say on that piece of it.
Yeah, and Dr. Wilsa, can you also speak to that as, coming out of your career, what encouragement you found and maybe how you guide athletes now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, what I like seeing nowadays is that this conversation is actually starting earlier. And I really think that to get athletes to recognize this and to see this, it starts from the top down. So the people that are in their sphere of influence, like their coaches, the athletic trainers, even the physicians that they see, and planting those seeds early, I think is very important. Now, why I think they need to do this is because if you have that sense of purpose, that sense of understanding of what you're trying to accomplish and where you're going with this, first of all, take some of the burden and the anxiety off of your just performance while you're an active athlete. But also it's the opportune time for them to do it when they're still competing, because that's when they have the most influence themselves, the most access to other people who have influence, and the most people paying attention that want to help. I think they should leverage those things. If they wait till later and not recognizing that for everybody, this comes to an end at some point in time. No one is going to be competing forever. So realizing that early on can help them not to feel like it's a failure when that time comes. And for many people, it comes unexpectedly. It's not like they set a date and that's when it's going to happen. So preparing themselves for that is really important, not just for their success during their career, but being able to navigate that transition in the future.
Thank you. And Robert, did you feel like you had support during this part of your life, or what did you do to start developing your long-term vision?
No, I certainly did. I think it's interesting what Dominic was saying with regards to the dark night of the soul. Was it there? We used to refer to it as the quarter life crisis. And so it was, if you really had that identity and you were passionate about your sport, we all been through it. We know others have. We called it the quarter life crisis. But yeah, no, I did have support during that aspect of my life. But we talked about in previous panels. You have to take that initiative as well. And I think getting to what a doctor was saying, I think it's important too for organizations such as Athlete Soul and others to have an access to people who have gone through that process, right? So someone you can relate to, doesn't have to be the same sport as you, but someone who really was passionate about their sport and is going through that transition. Because as we always say, wisdom is wasted on the young. So you can look towards those that have gone through it and that have made that transition around the other side and can say, look, this is what you need to be thinking about. This is what you should be thinking about. Because let's face it, your average 18, 19, 20-year-old that is passionate and deeply engaged in their sport, this is not going to be something to think about. And as we had discussed, this might even be something that they actually don't want to actively think about. I think it helps to have the conversation with those that have been through it that can say, look, these are things that you should at least start doing while you're within your career to help prepare yourself for that day, whenever that day may come. I'm not saying it's coming tomorrow, whenever it may come.
Right. And so why is it important to learn about purpose and values early on? Dr. Wilsa, you said, it's great this is happening earlier. Why is that so critical? And how can we maybe prompt athletes to do this sooner?
I think one big reason why it's so important is because it helps to keep things in perspective. When they're not looking at it like they're just chasing ambiguously to be successful and actually have a goal and being clear on what that goal is, that can help them to, again, pivot better, which is very important for any athlete in sport, even for other people. Most of the people who are their coaches, most of the people who are their trainers or doctors, whoever's working with them, they may have been athletes themselves, but clearly not doing that now, but still in other careers where they're successful and feeling fulfilled. For the athlete to be able to really understand what role sport has in their life right now and what they're trying to achieve can help them to better be able to pivot whenever that time comes for them to do so. Also, in terms of just decreasing their anxiety, which can impact performance, being clear on what you're trying to accomplish, how you're trying to get there, and also focusing on your personal goals as opposed to comparing yourself to others is also going to help them to be more successful even while they're competing. So I think that knowing those things is very important, not just for their success as an athlete, but for their understanding of who they are as a person and being able to figure out what that means for them long term whenever it comes that they're not doing this anymore.
Thank you. And Dominic, going to you next. What purpose and values do you think athletes should really focus on as they start to think about transitioning to career? Are there any specific ones we can guide them towards?
Well, absolutely. And I just wanted to say that back when I was playing professionally, you know, it was really looked down upon if you were engaged in any outside activities other than what the club had for us as far as charity work or appearances. Anything else outside of that, basically you were telling the club that you weren't that committed to, you know, helping the team win or whatever. Right. And I remember distinctly talking to a couple of my teammates that were doing side projects. One was doing investments and buying apartments, and one was a contractor. And it was like really kind of a hush hush around the team because we didn't want the coach to know that these guys were doing side projects. And so I think the whole name, image, and likeness thing now has taken that to completely off the board, where it's almost flipped, 180 degrees, where now, I mean, athletes are, you know, you better check your social. I mean, 4 months ago, as coaches, we were telling our athletes, stay off your phones, don't engage in social media. And then in July 1st, we're saying, get on your phones and start blowing up your social media pages. So it's really changed. And I think there's a shift going on for everybody, for players, athletes, administrators, to help our athletes and coaches and administrators figure out what's coming, and what this is all about as far as creating your brand, you know, defining what that is as far as your character, your integrity, your core values. So now you have to establish this brand on and off the field in a way we've never seen it before. And I think it's critically important to get this message to our high school athletes, even our elementary athletes to a degree. You know, I mean, it's kind of crazy we're saying that, but college coaches are actively recruiting 7th grade basketball players right now. So if that's the age we're starting to recruit college athletes, then I think this has got to be part of the discussion, even at that young age. So.
And Robert, I saw you smile. I've heard you share something similar about, you know, the expectations of being committed to your sport and your team and what that looks like. You want to share?
Yeah, no, I was just definitely going to echo what Dominic was saying there. Is I remember being in the locker room, and you know, again, if you're passionate about that sport, that's really all you're thinking about. You know, we used to have a couple of guys would read the Wall Street Journal, you know, in the locker room, and they were taking internships and the different investment banks and stuff in the city, and really clearly, you know, lining up their futures in that regard. And it was wise of them to do so. But several of us obviously looked at that and said, wait a minute, you know, we're here to play football. This is this. Many of us want to play at the next level, and you're already planning for a different path, you know? Yeah. And so that was the culture at the time. And I'm sure it's very much the culture, you know, today as well. And I think it's a matter of just changing that culture and allowing that to be okay, and even championing that to, you know, sort of get yourself in a position where you're preparing. And to Dr. Wilsa, what you were saying, I think is vitally important from the athlete. I think that we fail to realize that our entire careers are short-term goals. It is the next practice, the next game, the next workout. It's the season. That's even a short-term goal, right? And then on to the next season. And we have these constant short-term goals, and all of a sudden, that rug is pulled out from underneath you, and there's no short-term goal anymore. It's the rest of life. And I think to have yourself, especially from an athlete's mentality, to be as prepared as possible for that next step, or to have some other short-term goals that are post-athletic career goals that you can then attain and keep working towards, I think is extraordinarily important with sort of the mentality of the athlete. Because, you know, we like to think we're extremely independent people, but when it comes down to that, we are structured as athletes. We have our workout structure, we have our dietary structure. Everything is structured and those goals. And I think to a large part, you just learn that's a comfort level for you. So I think to set that up post athletic careers is vitally important.
Absolutely. And, you know, Dr. Wilsa, you mentioned how planning and having a broader perspective can actually help anxiety be lower for the athlete and therefore improve their performance. How can coaches help their athletes gain more confidence in thinking about longer term planning?
I think if people really look at the difference in how Transition is handled later for people who did plan for that and people who didn't plan for that. Even though it hasn't been the culture of sport to this point, I think that can really help people, even people who are kind of more stuck in older ways, to really understand the value in doing that. I also think that sharing your own story is very important. Again, I mentioned earlier that most of the people they're interacting with have a history or background in sports of some sort, regardless of what level it ended. Those coaches have their own story as well. And they're coaching for a reason. They're passionate about what they're passionate about for a reason. So being able to share those stories with the athletes and letting the athletes see that they see themselves as well as a success, that they are attaining new levels of success or different levels of success after sport, can help decrease their anxiety about even thinking about what comes next, and to remove that idea that to somehow to think about that sets them up for failure. It means that they're planning to fail. They're actually planning for a longer term or longer life of continued success if they're learning now and planning now for how to pivot when necessary. You think about sports things that take a long time. So not like 100-meter dash, but you're thinking about like a whole basketball game or a whole golf tournament. If an athlete gets stuck on one failure, one missed shot, one missed putt, falling under par, if they can't move past that point, then they're going to have a really hard time trying to find their comeback. They can still win and they can still be successful if they're able to move past that. Similarly, if they get stuck with their identity and what they're doing right now and not thinking about how does this play into my future? In the last lecture, Randy Pausch talks about head fakes, and basically where you're thinking that you're training for one thing or planning for one thing, but really you're learning and preparing for something completely different that might not even have been on your radar before. So helping them to understand how that works can really set them up to use all the things that they're learning. And there's so many life lessons in sports, but use all of those things towards continued success throughout their life. And I think if the coaches understand that, then they're going to be much better able to help the athletes understand that as well. And also not feel threatened if the athletes start trying to develop those things like we've heard about today.
Great, thank you. And, I'd like to maybe think a little more about the feelings of getting, coming out of this quarter life crisis or, the dark night of the soul. Like, how did it feel to you, Robert? Can you share first and maybe how that helped you step forward those feelings?
Yeah, it was interesting. We didn't really start discussing that until we were actually living it, right? So we didn't expect any of these things because we didn't have this environment. We didn't have people that were talking to us saying, line this up or line that up, or get ready to think and feel some of these emotions. And so my story a little bit. So I was an economics major in undergrad, and I stayed on that business path. I worked in New Delhi, India for like a year and a half, and worked in business. That was a good experience. And I came back and worked in LA as a junior agent and that industry. And then I eventually came back to medicine, which is what I wanted to do when I was 14 years old because of injuries. And so what did I do at that point in time? I called up all my former mentors of the past and people that were my team docs that treated me and operated on me. And then I had those conversations at that point in time to really say, what is it that I want to do with the rest of my career? And it sort of reverted back to the 14-year-old me that wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And then I had that guidance to get on that path. Now, I love that circuitous path and route that I took. I wouldn't trade it for anything, and it made for interesting medical school interviews. But that was end up being my path. But if somebody had sat right down ahead of time to say, expect some of these things, why don't we just really try to figure out what it is you may be passionate about? And I would say too, it's tough to really fully appreciate and predict ahead of time, because I know for many of us, and it was for me, how do I recreate that locker room? Right? You can't really recreate the game, but how do I recreate that locker room and those wonderful feelings that I miss of the camaraderie and of the team? And for me, everybody's different. For me, it ended up being that environment and that collaborative environment of medicine and orthopedics. And so I ended up finally settling into the right spot. But I think it would have certainly helped to have that guidance that we're talking about at the time.
Thank you. And Dominic, what about you coming out of your dark night? You mentioned, thinking about your legacy, but what did that feel, what feelings were you cultivating as you tried to move forward?
Well, here's the thing that, thanks, Valerie. Here's the thing that really changed it for me was just my belief systems of what I believed about relationships. What did I believe about job searching? What did I believe? And when I went back and identified the 5, 6 major areas of my life at the time that were important to me, I was saying, okay, what do I believe about this? What do I believe about that? And then I would say, well, who's the voice in my head that I hear that's helping me with that belief system? And what I discovered was the majority of those people that were speaking to me as far as where I got my beliefs from they weren't mine. They were grandma, grandpas, my parents, my coaches. They were all telling me this, and it worked as an athlete. It helped me get to the highest levels of athletics, but in the real world, almost none of that served me. So I had to go back and really rewrite my belief systems about relationships, marriage, career, health. I'm learning now this weekend with the panel, sleep maybe played a part of it, and the way I thought about eating and all that stuff, right? So what I discovered was once I changed my beliefs about my life and where I wanted to go, then things really started to change positive for me. And what I discovered was my greatest adversary, my greatest challenges in the real world eventually became some of my greatest accomplishments, because I can share those stories with my clients now and can talk to a doctor of engineering or a CEO and say, listen, here's my suggestion, and where you're at right now and why maybe think about this way or that way is because I went through it. And so I've just been able to take my challenges and my adversity and turn them into accomplishments and be able to serve others. And I mean, I was a captain in all 3 teams in high school and college and in the pros. And I think some of that captain-ness, if you will, comes out in my coaching with my clients. So sometimes the adversity becomes your greatest accomplishments.
Oh yeah, definitely. And Dr. Wilson, what came up for you as you were reflecting during your transition about your purpose and values?
I will say those were, when we talk about that being the dark ages, those were definitely dark times. It was not something at that time that I felt happy about or satisfied with having to make those changes at the time. For me, the different transitions that I've had to make with respect to sports, but also with respect to some career changes in the moment, they did feel like failures at that time, years and years ago. It did feel like, well, I didn't accomplish this thing I said I was going to do before. And most of us athletes are very driven people, very much about plans and goals. And, you get used to being very rigid about how you measure those things. But it really took time to be able to learn and appreciate what we've talked about today about pivoting and seeing the value in that. Getting a chance to recognize that just because you're not doing one thing that you set out to do doesn't mean that you can't accomplish what's really important to you when you take the time to actually figure out what that is. And you might find even greater success in the other path. Sometimes what seems like a failure actually is set up for you to do something even better and more purpose than what you had in mind or what you even dreamed of. But you really have to be able to take that into consideration to really get that perspective and allow yourself to feel those feelings. This transition, when you've been an athlete for a long period of time, when you've been in any role for a long period of time, it becomes a part of who you are. So recognizing that it's okay to have that dark period, don't let it last too long, but it's okay to feel that way. You're not abnormal. This is not wrong. You just really have to recognize that, okay, I felt that. Now what's next? And I think coming out of that has given me great perspective moving forward. It helps me a lot in helping other people to understand what they're going through and to find the value in what they're doing now. And good mentors, I think, is also important. I remember people saying, like, you could be doing something so much bigger than what you're worried about not having done if you would just see what you actually have to work with. And not letting those people like naysayers that are, in your ear, maybe about what you said you're going to do but didn't do. Not focusing on that, really focusing on your own internal sense of value and internal validation as opposed to external validation, I think is a key tool for helping athletes or anyone to overcome what seems like a setback.
Well, and a lot of,
sorry.
Of course.
I was going to just quickly compound on that, and I'm sure Dominic's going to agree, but I think that the value of coaching in our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as Dr. Wilson mentioned, in mentorship. I mean, in many ways, that is the coach, and in some ways, an actual trained coach would be better. But we as athletes, again, we are used to working hard behind the scenes, but we are used to having a coach looking over us, watching that film, dissecting everything that we're doing, and helping us to get better. Then we go into the real world, and all of a sudden, that coach, that mentor, that person who's there that's helping us to get better is nowhere to be found. So I think, seeking those mentorships, but being able to form those relationships even while you're an athlete, and try to set yourself up for success later on, so you can have mentors, coaches in your professional life that are again geared towards and focused towards helping you to improve. I think is also something that's helpful both professionally and I probably think mentally as well, because that's just how we're programmed, is to have that coach helping us.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. Dominic, did you want to add anything?
Well, I was just going to say, basically for me, it was a 26-year relationship that I had with athletics. 4 of it was professional. And when that came to an end, I really didn't know we had broken up. And I was getting into a new marriage with my wife and a ready-made, family of 3 kids. And there was a lot going on there that I had no idea. We didn't really have I don't remember hearing the word mental health until maybe just a few years ago. So mental health back then wasn't, it was suck it up and just go get a job. Okay, well, what do I do? How does that work, right? So, but like our panelists have discussed this far, is that a lot of that has helped tremendously in being able to serve others going through this. And without it, there's no way I could be doing what I do now and being as impactful as I am now with my clients and in a space, which again is going back to Athlete Soul and the different organizations that are helping, bring this to light, helping us understand mental health, what that means, and being able to take care of it as early as possible, or addressing it as early as possible. And really the parents have got to get involved in this too, because we're pushing our young athletes so hard right now, because they see the big money, they see the bright lights, they see the social media, and they want their kids to, and I think we're going to have more work to do. This work is not going to end anytime soon.
No, but we have lots of exciting coaches willing to try new things and really focused on the athlete's well-being. There was one more concept I wanted to discuss, which is clarity. I feel like we maybe talked about how the path isn't linear, or you have to kind of wait and see how it unfolds. Maybe you're confused and then you get this new perspective later. So if we could talk about what clarity means to you and how important it is to an athlete. Dr. Wilson, will you start us off?
Sure. Sometimes when we talk about clarity, we're talking about, there's a lot of different ways, first of all, to address it, and a lot of things it can mean. Sometimes in sport, we're talking about clarity with respect to roles in sport, like your role on a team. When you're clear about what your role is, what your position is, then you can do your part to make the whole team work together to be more successful. I think similarly with sport, we have to be clear about what the role of that sport is for that person's life. And we talked earlier about being clear about goals. So is this person trying to be the greatest of all time? Are they trying to break a record? Are they just trying to, but trying to make it to the Olympics? Are they trying to make this a longer term thing? Or is this what they want to do now and then transition to something else after college? Getting clear on those goals can help them to really target their efforts and manage their expectations and also the results that they get. I think that also it's important to recognize that clarity develops over time. And you might feel that you're clear on what this means to you right now, but that might change. You might have life-changing circumstances, becoming a parent, or, as we talked about, getting married. Like, these things can change, like what's actually your purpose, what do you value? So being aware of that and being willing to check in with yourself periodically and figure out what it is that you're really after, I think can really help to direct where you want to go with your sport, and also after, and how you want to use it.
Yeah, thank you. Dominic, clarity for you, what does that look like, feel like?
Yeah, for clarity for me just really means getting out there, engaging in the marketplace, being curious, asking questions. I mentioned a couple of my teammates, looking at their next career. A lot of my athletes went on to become broadcasters, coaches, architecture, media, medicine, law. And so really clarity is just getting out there. If you're not really sure what you want to do, I think Robert mentioned earlier, going back to that, your 6th grade class, room, and just visualizing like the teacher giving you a free day. You can go into any area of the school you wanted to, as far as, you want to go to recess or science or the library. Where would you spend your time? What would you do if you didn't have to do anything? Where do you get lost in time, where time just flies because you enjoy what you're doing? Is it film editing? Is it reading? What is it? What is it that you just love to do? And I would just say, follow your heart. Go with the things that, you get lost in time and space, and things just come easy for you. Don't take that for granted because it comes easy. Is like, well, maybe I shouldn't do it. If it comes easy, I would say explore it fully and enjoy. If you enjoy it, keep going down that path, because we say all the time, if you love what you do, you don't ever have to go to work for a living, right? You just do what you love, and the money will come. And so clarity for me means, if you don't have it, get out in the marketplace, engage, interact, ask questions, and go try on a lot of different, shoes and jackets, and, try on a lot of different things before you discover what that thing might be for you.
And Robert, it sounded like you kind of went through that process. You circled back to something that you identified as being really enjoyable and fun for you. Have you found clarity? Are you still looking? Tell us more.
Well, the answer is recess. Clearly. Can't be more clear than that. But no, I think to a certain degree, we're all sort of still searching, for that. But yes, I mean, clarity is an extraordinarily important thing, and I think it's one of those things you always hear, and you'll kind of hear from your parents, or at least that you'll know it when you see it, type things, or you'll know it when you feel it. And I remember, just from different sports, being recruited. Why did you go to this school? I don't know. I went there. Campus felt right. The coaches felt right. The team felt right. And that was my choice. It wasn't overly challenging once I got to feel at a couple different schools, as Dominic said, and that was my choice. Which is why in my field, we have a great opportunity to sort of tell a lot of our med students, for example, or residents, hey, go and get in the office, especially the med students. Go, if you think you might want to go into orthopedics or pediatrics or something, go in the office and immerse yourself in that environment and see if it does feel right for you. And you might, get that clarity for yourself, or you might not. You might have to go and attempt something else. Again, as Dominic was saying, you might have to try a few different things until you really kind of feel that clarity. For me, yeah, it ended up working similar to that. And I guess, as we said before, I kind of came back to that earlier, younger, probably wiser me, and decided going into orthopedics. And I have had a little bit of that theory going through and recreating that locker room environment. But I think it just goes back to, again, something like Athlete Soul, having those mentors, having those coaches, having people allow you exposure to different avenues that you already think that you may be interested in, and really trying to see if you can find that clarity as best as possible. It's very challenging.
Thank you so much. Miriam, I know we're finishing up this session, but also the whole summit itself. Did you want to add anything to our discussion?
Well, first of all, you have all covered this topic left and right, and it was really interesting and insightful. No, I don't have anything specific to add to this particular panel discussion. I just feel very inspired by everything I've heard for the last 2 days, and the direction of the sport industry, really looking at the athletes from a holistic perspective and taking care of their mental health, and really looking at them as more than just athletes, but really human beings who have a long life to live after sport. So that for me is a very exciting and positive message. So yeah, thank you to you guys for this wonderful discussion. Thank you, Val, for moderating this panel. I want to give a shout out to Michael, who is one of our interns who've been working on planning this summit for the last 2 months. He's done a terrific job, and it's been fantastic. And I think he's staying with us as an intern. We have a 3 live coaching session tomorrow. It's kind of like a practical time for Feed the Soul. We're bringing on Dominic, but also 2 other coaches from Athlete Soul who are going to be doing some live coaching with some of our athletes so that we can learn what that looks like. since it's a big part of what we do at Athlete Soul. So I invite you to join us from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. tomorrow morning Pacific time. And then we will be sharing the recording for all of our events for the last 2 days with our participants early next week. So you'll be able to view the replays and share with others and have access to resources from our panelists as well. And with that, thank you all.